away from my window.
Hi, welcome to the Pioneer Museum, and this is our story from out of the past. Come on in, we're going to visit with someone who has some information about history that I think you'll be interested in. Welcome to the Pioneer Museum, and this is our story from out of the past. Today I'm going to visit with Dennis Tate. He is the individual that's been responsible for the Great Sounds of Interlaken display, which has attracted a lot of visitors and interest in the Pioneer Museum. Okay, part of the interest in this display that's been generated is the hippie van that's out in front of the museum, Dennis. What can you tell us about that?
Well, it's a bit colorful. We thought that would be a nice addition to this exhibit. It's a nice draw, and we've had many people that have volunteered their time and their patience, and we have Rick DeBoer has done a lot of painting on it. Shalom Body Shop did some painting on it, body work, and Glenn Retire and Big Richards. They've all been real helpful in making that a success out there, so we want to thank them all.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but don't you have kind of a background in music with some of these?
Yeah, I played in a couple of the early 60s rock and roll bands, and that's kind of my interest in it right there.
Okay. Well, let's take a moment and take a look at some of the groups that are displayed.
Sure.
Not every group displayed here, but most of them are have a local background or local connection in some respect. Can you point out a couple that are...
Correct, Lenny. Almost all the bands here are from Fairmont or the Fairmont area. I'd like to mention the first one here is the Radiants, and they were, in fact, the very first rock and roll band in Fairmont that we're aware of. Mm-hmm. And we were very lucky to get this photo in this condition because it's been laying in somebody's file for 45 years. These guys were all from Fairmont except for one here that we're not aware of who he is. The other one is the Twilighters. They were a 60s band, what I call a Beatles band. Once the Beatles came to America, there was just a mushrooming of rock and roll bands. And this is one of the first ones.
Are some of these people still around Fairmont?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
A couple of them look familiar.
Yeah.
They look like Steve Faust.
Sure, Steve Faust is there.
And maybe Larry Totsky?
Larry Totsky, you got it.
Yeah, I think so.
A couple of nice fellows.
Yeah. And what about the one down here?
Well, we kind of expanded this into more than just rock and roll. That was actually the first folk group in Fairmont, Minnesota, and that's the Warren Nelson and John Larson.
Okay. Sure.
And they both still are from Fairmont.
Sure. And this group here would have been an offshoot of Warren Nelson?
That's correct. That is a later version of, actually this came later. This was about 1967 that photo was taken. That was the Nelly Folk. Mm-hmm. Very good group, very popular. Okay.
This isn't a local group, but it looks like they were at the Sirloin House.
No, it sure isn't a local group. That's our former mayor, Lou Donnelly, and he was experimenting with offering entertainment at the Sirloin House, and he brought these guys in on a Monday night, and I think they were only there one time, but it was quite an event for Fairmont. They were nationally known. They were much like the Beatles were to the 60s generation.
The Ink Spots was their name? And
they were a nationally known group.
I can imagine they drew a really large crowd when they were here.
Very large.
Okay. Well, let's move on to some of the other displays.
Okay.
Okay, this isn't, I guess, a group, but the Youth Center. Now, how does that tie in with these bands and things?
Right, Lenny. This is the Fairmont Youth Center. This is really where rock and roll started in Fairmont, Minnesota. It spawned many rock and roll bands, at least a dozen from Fairmont alone.
So some of these bands played at the Youth Center, actually?
Oh, absolutely. I think all the early bands did.
So they kind of got their start there?
Right, absolutely. This is where it all began. Okay.
What were the years that the Youth Center was popular, especially for those bands?
I would say it was probably in the early 60s, my recollection, and I'm not sure what year it ended, but probably in the early 70s. Mm-hmm. But it was an amazing place for young people in Fairmont.
Sure. Okay, moving on, another display. This apparently is not a local group, but there's a Fairmont connection.
Yeah, this was a very popular group in the Twin Cities, the Loves. They backed up many of the very top bands in the nation, and Linda Fritz was from Fairmont, Minnesota.
Okay. And Epicureans.
Yeah, Epicureans were...
looks like somebody familiar in that.
Well, yeah, that blonde guy on the top there.
Does that happen to be Dennis Tate?
Yeah. And they were a very popular band in Fairmont, and they were noted for driving around in a Cadillac hearse.
That's kind of their trademark.
That was their trademark. And when they came to town, everybody knew it was the Epicureans because of the hearse.
How long did these groups last in general?
Typically a rock and roll band in the Fairmont probably lasted a year and a half, 2 years, something like that. That was real typical.
Did they play, some of these groups play beyond Fairmont then?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. They would travel the entire Midwest, many of them.
Okay. This is another group. I don't know if you'd call them a rock and roll
Well,
group.
certainly they're not a rock and roll band, but they definitely deserve to be in this exhibit because they were a very popular early country and western style music. And this is a picture of them by the KSUM studio back in about, I'm going to guess that was about 59.
Sure, looks like it about that time.
Very popular band.
Millie and the Saddle Pals.
Absolutely, great band.
And then down at the bottom, this is a group really going back into the past.
Yes, it is. Well, this, like you mentioned earlier, this has really evolved into more than just a rock and roll exhibit. It's the whole history of Martin County's music. And
from Lynn Kearns and the Rhythm Club.
And the Rhythm Club were an amazing orchestra, regional territory band that was very popular.
Mm-hmm.
So we're delighted to have their photo in here.
Great, great. Okay, and with the display, Dennis, I see you have a number of musical instruments, and I think I'd like to have you just focus on this one and tell us a little bit about it, the banjo up there.
Yeah, that's a very special instrument to us because that belonged to Thane Peck. Thane Peck was a very popular musician in Fairmont for his entire life, and the family loaned this to us, and we're very happy to have it in here. And we're hoping to get more instruments in the future, too.
Sure. Well, great. Well, Dennis, thank you very much for coming in for the interview, and especially for all the work you've done on this display. Dennis comes in, I think, about every week and adds things, changes things around. He's just done a terrific job with this display, and it's really created a great deal of interest here at the Pioneer Museum. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lenny, and thanks for having the display here.
Okay. This is Lenny Tweeten for This Is Our Story from Out of the Past.